Hello, everyone. I hope everybody's having a good day so far. Let folks slowly start trickling in here. Welcome to our August edition of our industry webinar series. We have a really exciting topic to share with you all today that I've been looking forward to. So I hope you all will enjoy it as well. And thank you so much for taking the time to listen in. I'll just say at the top of the hour here that this month's segment of our industry webinar series is titled The Great Bike Infrastructure Project. This is our newest People for Bikes program, our campaign that we're really excited about. And before we get started, I also just wanted to remind folks that this is going to be recorded. We'll send out the recording later along with the slides. So those folks who are unable to attend or would like to re-listen later for reference, that will be available to you later today. We can get into the presenters today, our wonderful speakers that we have. I'm just here to open up the conversation, but I'm Director of State and Local Policy at People for Bikes, but I get to work with two amazing colleagues that we're all working closely on this campaign. But our first speaker is Dave Snyder, the Senior Director of Infrastructure at People for Bikes, as well as our wonderful colleague Martina, who's the Senior Director of Local Innovation here at People for Bikes. So they're going to take you through our new bike infrastructure campaign, all the ins and outs of it, and we're so excited to share it with you. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Martina.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and welcome everyone. We're going to spend about 45 minutes together during this webinar, with the first 30 minutes or so learning through a presentation, and then we'll spend the final 15 minutes or so through a question and answer session. Please be sure to use Zoom's question and answer feature to write in your questions throughout the session so that we can be ready to answer those questions when we get to the end of the webinar. So if you have questions that pop up throughout, just enter them right in there and we'll make sure we put them in the queue to answer towards the end. As the national advocacy organization and trade association for the United States bicycling industry, we at People for Bikes work towards a goal of getting more people riding bikes more often through three primary pillars. We work through infrastructure to accelerate the construction of safe, fun, and connected places to ride. We work through policy to advance pro-bike legislation at the state, local, and federal levels. And through participation, we work to reduce barriers to access and introduce more people to the joy of riding bikes. Today, we're going to dive into our work on infrastructure in particular, especially our new program, which is called the Great Bike Infrastructure Project. To understand why we are so focused on infrastructure, I think it's really important to understand where we are as a country in creating safe and connected places for people to ride their bikes. So each year, People for Bikes City Ratings program evaluates more than 1,000 US cities across the country, as well as hundreds of international cities for the quality of their low-stress bike networks. And what we've discovered is that 50 on the scale of 0 to 100 is really the tipping point at which it tends to become easier for cities to accelerate bike infrastructure and participation in biking. Not surprisingly, cities like Amsterdam and Copenhagen score quite highly in our program. And there are a growing number of good US biking cities, places like Berkeley and Minneapolis. But there are even more cities that are sort of in this 25 to 49 range. It's just under about 500 US cities that are in that range of 25 to 49. And those cities, we really think, have such tremendous opportunity to take a huge leap forward and become great biking cities like our international counterparts. As of 2019, the United States only had about 30 cities that we would consider good biking cities, cities that scored at least 50 on our scale in city ratings. So places like Portland, Berkeley, and Madison that invested heavily in the creation of low-stress bike networks. That number is growing though, which is great news. In 2023, nearly 100 US cities received city rating scores of at least 50. Unfortunately, Many other US cities, as many of you know, still have piecemeal bike networks that aren't well connected. They don't get people where they need to go, and they certainly aren't safe for people of all ages, abilities, and backgrounds. Although things are getting better, we want to see hundreds of great biking cities all across the United States from coast to coast, ensuring that more people of all ages, all abilities, all backgrounds, have access to great bike infrastructure for transportation and for recreation. Dave, is there anything you wanted to add in there?
Yeah, Martina, I'd like to jump in just to emphasize the tipping point, because in our experience, once cities get a network of low stress bikeways, which is what City Ratings measures, once they get to 50, those bikeways connect most destinations and more people start using their bikes for things like taking their kids to school or getting exercise in their senior years. And people come out of the woodwork to advocate for safer streets. At least in the large and medium cities in our rankings, advocacy takes on a life of its own. That's why we're focusing this project on the cities that are almost great.
Thanks, Dave. So more great news is that there's now more federal funding available for active transportation projects, biking and walking projects, than ever before in the history of the federal government. In fact, there's about 6 times more federal funding that we estimate will be available for bike and pedestrian projects over the next few years. So what that means is that local communities and states all across the country have a shot at more than $3 billion each year over the next few years in federal funding for active transportation projects. Now that's going to translate into thousands of new and better bike projects from coast to coast, both for recreation and for transportation. People for Bikes wants to help ensure that local communities and states can take advantage of this opportunity and get more people riding bikes and more bike projects on the ground as quickly as possible. We've also helped pass an unprecedented amount of local funding for bike infrastructure, equating to more than $4 billion just in 2022 alone. And we want to help pass even more state and local funding for bikes in the years to come. We really are in the midst of an unprecedented opportunity. I often say a once in a lifetime opportunity, and Dave likes to remind us all that this shouldn't be a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I certainly hope it's not once in a lifetime for all of us, but it is unprecedented. It's an unprecedented opportunity to advance bike infrastructure in the United States and to transform America with a new wave of infrastructure investments, unlike anything we've ever seen. Over the years, People for Bikes has helped advance bike infrastructure through numerous programs. Programs like City Ratings, the Green Lane Project, Vote for Bikes, the Big Jump, and the Final Mile. And we've taken the best practices from all of those programs and built upon them to help communities across the country move faster to take advantage of this unique moment in time. So why are we so laser focused on infrastructure here at People for Bikes? What we've found is that infrastructure is really the #1 barrier to participation in bicycling. And we think it's absolutely critical that we make biking safer and more comfortable for people of all ages and all abilities in order to get more people riding bikes more often. We also know that about half of people worry about being hit by a car while riding a bike. And that is justified. Nearly all cyclist fatalities happen on our roads or at intersections, which is not surprising. We also know that the majority of people are interested in riding more, but they're concerned. And we know that protected bike lanes and safe bike networks make cities safer and makes streets safer for everyone, reducing fatalities and injuries better than any other intervention could. Bike infrastructure saves lives, and it opens up riding to more people, both for recreation and transportation. Again, not surprisingly, good bike infrastructure and well-connected bike networks get more people riding bikes more often. As city rating scores increase in cities, So does ridership. We can see that right here in this chart where we have measured city ratings in a number of cities, as well as the census bike to work mode share.
And that brings us to the Great Bike Infrastructure Project. This is our campaign to build a more bikeable nation by transforming our communities, not one community at a time, but many communities at once through great bike infrastructure projects. It's also a great big project. We're talking thousands of bike projects and a prioritized set of legislative strategies, model legislation, you could say, that we provide to local and state leaders to implement the policies that will help build that infrastructure. At the center of the project campaign is our national database of bike projects. This database features an interactive list and map of more than 1,000 projects. Some are transportation focused, others are recreation focused. Most are both. As you know, trail systems are fun to ride on and they get you where you're going. I like to say great bike infrastructure provides transportation that feels like recreation. The project list is diverse, as you can see, but we did apply some criteria to every project before including it in our list. They must be included in a plan. Usually this is a bike or transportation plan from a government agency, but a respected community plan would qualify. They must have the potential to be built within the next 5 years, even if we know that that's going to require an advocacy push. And they must be an all ages and abilities facility that is open to children, accessible, and little to no traffic stress. For example, we don't include lousy door zone bike lanes or sharrows on high speed or moderate speed streets on this list. So let's check out the list. You can reach it from our website or at infrastructure.peopleforbikes.org. Click on the projects button, and it will bring up a chart of all 1,000+ projects. Information on every project includes its name and its location, the type of project that it is, its status, more about that in a minute when we look at the map, a link for more information about the project, and the organizations that you can work with to help make that project get to the finish line, to make sure it gets built. We've anticipated a lot of the questions that people will have about this list and put them in an FAQ page, which you can get to from our website. People might also want to add projects. We hope they want to add projects or update the status of the project or make a correction. To add a project, we've provided a form you can use. And if your project meets our criteria, we'll add it to the list. To help you with the criteria about all ages and abilities, we've provided a link to the guidance from the National Association of City Transportation Officials that details what kind of bike facility is appropriate for various kinds of streets and traffic conditions. What kind of bike facility gets you a low stress bikeway? And we've also provided a link for you to update the project status, add some missing information, make some other corrections that are necessary. This is a huge project, growing and evolving as we speak, and we will continue to refine and fine-tune the information and the projects. It's going to live on for years to come, so we welcome feedback. So please help us out that way. Now let's take a look at the map, also accessible from our website. Except for a handful of projects for which we don't yet know the status, each project is indicated on the map with a dot colored to indicate its status. These are completed projects. They've been built in the last 12 to 24 months. People are riding on them, and joy pervades through the community. We expect to see this map fill up with blue dots in the next 3 to 5 years to show our movement is transforming communities across the United States. These yellow dots are projects that are fully funded and ready for construction, soon to join that growing list of completed projects. Some vigilance may still be necessary, but for the most part, we expect people to be able to benefit from these projects very soon. The orange dots are projects that are formally approved, but they're not yet funded. Some of them are in a regional transportation plan with funding slated for 10 or more years out. Some are approved, but with no dedicated funding at all. These are among the projects we want to help with. Money should not be an excuse for these most cost-effective of infrastructure projects. As Martina said, there's an unprecedented amount of federal funding available. She mentioned our work to get local money, and that's important because there's billions of dollars in local and state funding that will have to be leveraged if we expect to build all of this bike infrastructure when we should, which is now. As Martina will explain in a minute, that's why our legislative strategies guide highlights as the first priority dozens of ways that local and state governments have supplemented federal resources with their own funding. And then finally, these are the projects that are proposed. These are important links in a bike network or important accessible recreational facilities that have not yet been approved by the relevant authorities. They may be approved in concept, but not final design, which we all know can be treacherous. We've all seen protected bike lane projects that turn into an inferior door zone bike lane thanks to opposition. So we have to be vigilant. Let's take a look at one of these proposed projects in San Antonio. When you click on any of these dots, a card will pop up that shows the project's name, its location, the organizations that you can work with to support the project, and a link for more information. In this case, that link takes us to a page promoting a two-way protected bike lane on Broadway. This is a petition page put together by local advocates, Bike San Antonio. On this page, Bike San Antonio highlights a threat to their proposed BEST project. You probably can't read that. I'll tell you that it says that the current design calls for a diversion of the bikeway to an inferior street, and it will limit the benefit of this project for people of all ages and abilities. This is a good example of how People for Bikes can help. So here's how we'll help. First, we'll connect people to the local group championing the project. In this case, it's Bike San Antonio. In most cases, depending upon our own schedule and a few other factors, we'll be happy to send out an action alert to our contacts in the region where the bike project is being proposed to encourage people to add their voice in support of the project and their support of the local advocacy organization advancing the project. We want to tell stories about these projects. Stories move people. Stories about people who overcame mental or physical health struggles thanks to bicycling, or who saved money to move to a better living situation thanks to being able to rely on an affordable bike instead of a car for many of their trips. Stories from mayors or business people who talk about how a protected bike lane improved the business environment and sales on their street. Using our media team and our social media channels, we can help to bring some national attention to your local project. I gave a couple of examples of stories there, but do please use those examples or suggest your own examples and get in touch with me or Martina so that we can promote those stories for you, because we want to celebrate these local wins and these local organizations. And then finally, within the month, we'll launch this year's round of community grants to provide a little bit of funding that can make a big impact on a local project. So that's the map and the list of projects. The last piece of the Great Bike Infrastructure Project is our legislative strategies guide. Martina, will you please tell us about this part?
I'd love to.
All right.
So our legislative strategies guide provides examples of the most effective legislative strategies for states and local governments, cities or towns or counties, to get more bike infrastructure built. It includes specific examples at the state, county, and local levels, as well as actual links to examples of legislation in other places that you can copy for your own community. Copy, paste, there's no need to reinvent the wheel here. We're providing the best examples, and we want you to be able to use them easily. So with this guide, we want to help legislators, their staff, and anybody who wants to engage their elected officials with suggestions of the most effective policy changes to accelerate the construction of bike infrastructure, again, for recreation and for transportation. We want to support both kinds of projects at various levels. This isn't just a transportation-focused project. We talk a lot about all ages and abilities facilities on streets, but we're also really interested in advancing other kinds of infrastructure projects, whether it be bike parks or off-road trails. And we want to do this for hundreds of governments at the state, county, and local levels, all across the country from coast to coast in every single state. So our first strategy, which we say is the best way to get more infrastructure built, is of course to increase funding at the state and local levels. Our legislative guide includes more than a dozen examples of different ways to fund bike infrastructure through state and local mechanisms. So this includes things that you might be familiar with, like general obligation bonds or sales tax measures, but it also includes numerous other funding mechanisms like tax increment financing or business improvement districts, and many, many more. So we encourage you to check those out and see what might be helpful for your state or city. The second most effective way to get more bike infrastructure built is to mandate complete streets. So complete streets is a concept that helps ensure safe and accessible routes for all road users, whether you're walking, biking, taking the bus, or driving. And complete streets mandates require bike and pedestrian improvements and transit improvements anytime roads are constructed, repaved, or restriped. And these can apply to either state departments of transportation or to local cities and towns. It's also really important to understand that complete streets and mandates are significantly stronger and much more effective than complete streets policies. Policies often only recommend that agencies consider complete streets improvements, but they certainly don't require them. So our guide provides specific examples of effective complete streets mandates that include things like very clear requirements. They offer very limited exceptions to the mandates, and they also clearly define roles to ensure the long-term success of these programs. Our third strategy is advancing bike infrastructure through climate legislation. As more states and cities consider climate legislation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it's more important than ever that we position ourselves and we ensure that climate legislation includes bike infrastructure as a tool to reduce vehicle miles traveled. Our guide includes specific examples of climate legislation that has been passed in Minnesota, Washington State, Rhode Island, and Hawaii. And we highlight the specific parts of each of those pieces of legislation that we think are the most effective that you should ensure you include in your climate legislation for your state or for your city. Our fourth and final strategy for advancing bike infrastructure through legislation is creating safer places to ride by reducing traffic speeds, limiting right turns on red for vehicles to improve intersection safety, and adopting modern design standards like the National Association of City Transportation Officials Bike Design Guide to help ensure that engineers and planners are designing streets and bike infrastructure that is safe and comfortable for everyone. We encourage everyone to check out this legislative guide, whether you're an industry member, an advocate, policymaker, or an elected official. You can use our guide to explore examples of legislation that will improve your community and give you inspiration and insights into the different approaches available to advance bike infrastructure through legislation. You can also use our guide to focus on the most effective strategies first, that being state and local funding for bike infrastructure and complete streets mandates. If you are helping to advance any of this legislation in your state or your local community, please let us know. Our team is available to help, and we would love to keep track of this legislation across the country. You can touch base with us. We'll provide our email addresses at the end of the presentation, but you can also reach us at infrastructure@peopleforbikes.org. So if you're interested in advancing projects or policies in your community, please visit our website to learn more about the strategies in our guide and also to learn about projects in your backyard, the map and the list that Dave walked you through earlier. We also encourage you to sign up for our action alerts on our website. If you go to the project website for the Great Bike Infrastructure Project, you'll see there a link to sign up for our newsletter and our action alerts. And when you sign up for this, this will allow us to email you when there's a project or a policy that's at a critical stage in your community. Maybe it's a city council hearing or a hearing to secure funding for a bike project, or maybe a mayor is threatening to remove a bike project in your community once it's been built because there's pushback. We want to let you know that you can take action on those at those critical points. So please be sure to sign up for our action alerts. And also, make sure you contact your local policymakers and your local advocacy groups. Our list and our map of the projects has links to all of the local and state advocacy groups and project-specific advocacy groups connected to all of these projects that we've listed on there across the country, with hyperlinks right to their websites. So please get in touch with them and see how you can help advance those projects and legislation from our guide in your community. And of course, we always encourage folks to support our work at People for Bikes, which you can do through our website. And with that, I believe we are at Q&A.
That was so wonderful. Thanks, Dave and Martina. This program and this campaign as a whole is just so powerful. And I think it's going to completely change the landscape for bike infrastructure across the US. So I'm excited to be a part of it. And I'm so excited so many of you are on the webinar today to learn more about it and hopefully join us in our goal to improve bike infrastructure across the country. So we are perfectly at time. We have plenty of time for Q&A here. So please click the Q&A box if you'd like to ask a question. I do see one question here that I think is pretty good, Martina or Dave, if you'd like to answer, but this attendee is asking, they're saying that their city is ranked fairly low. What would be your best suggestions for somebody who, sees that their city is ranked low through a city ratings program? What initial steps can they take to try and improve that score?
Sure. I'll take that. Hi, Connie. So what I would do is focus on a portion of your city. The city ratings refers to the entire city. You can go onto the website and you can see which census tracts have better access than others because they might be located closer to a denser part of your city. Focus on that part of your city and identify the infrastructure that can connect those census tracts that are already pretty good to the ones adjacent to it, and identify the pieces of infrastructure that you need to connect those tracts to others and build from there. That's my suggestion.
Great. Did you want to add anything there, Martina?
I think we have some tools on our website. We have an advocacy playbook that might be helpful, and also specific ideas for things cities can do. We call them our sprint principles, so lowering speed limits and other things like that. Those are all available on our website. So I think those would be great places to start.
We have one more question just on the BNA. This one should be an easy one, but is the BNA based off of crowdsourcing information, or how is that information gathered?
Sure, I can take that. So the bicycle network analysis, which is the foundation for our city ratings program that scores cities for the quality of their low stress bike networks, is not based on crowdsourced information necessarily. It imports data from OpenStreetsMap, which, in a way is crowdsourced information, but is pretty reliable. And that is how we determine whether a street is low stress or not, whether, what the speed limit on it is, how many lanes of traffic there are on that street, whether there's parking, and what kind of bike facility or sidewalk that street has. And that is how that's generated. We used to have a portion of our city rating score that was also based on a community survey. So it was a combination of the bicycle network analysis score and the community survey. This year, for the first time, we've done away with that community survey score, and now it is a more scientific basis for the score based solely on the BNA.
Mm-hmm. We have a lot of questions here, so if there's a specific one you see, Martina and Dave, please let me know.
I think there was one question that I saw about someone had asked, bike projects that are scheduled like 10, 20, 30 years out in a transportation master plan or a vision document. And this person asked, how can we speed these up? Which is a question that we get a lot. And so I think, there are some very specific things that you can do there. Talk to the decision makers. So I go to your, the bicycle and pedestrian planner for your state or your city if you have one, or the city or town planner, and ask them how you can help them move these projects forward. You want to work with them. You don't want to work against them. So ask them what you can do to make their job easier. So what do they need to implement these projects faster?
Yeah.
And then see if you can help them get what they need. If they need funding, help them explore existing federal or state funding opportunities, or help connect them with the right people like us who can help them figure that out. Or help them advocate for new local funding streams, as is suggested in our legislative strategies guide. If they need to hear that more people really do want bike projects now, help them rally support for an email writing campaign. Work with your local advocacy group if you have one, or if you don't, you can come to us for tips on how to get that going. It's always great for elected officials or town planners to hear from community members and from voters that they want these projects. So often those elected officials only hear when something's wrong, when someone's angry about something, but it's great to be proactive and get people to voice their opinions so that they know there is demand for these projects and that they'll have the support of the community when they build them.
Yeah, and I'd like to add and give an example of a region that did a pretty good job with that. In San Diego, they had your typical set of bike infrastructure projects budgeted out over 30 years. In all of these regional transportation plans, the bike portion is relatively small, and there's no reason why we should wait in year 20 to build a bike infrastructure project when we're spending so much money in the plan over the course of the 30 years. In San Diego, they explicitly adopted an early action program where they front-loaded all of the bike projects into the first part of the regional transportation plan. So their 30 years of bike projects were built or supposed to be built. And I'm sure San Diego folks will mention some challenges to this, that they were supposed to be built in the first 10 years. So it's a political decision, and work with the bike planner, like Martina said, to learn as much as you can about the project and the context, and then go to the political policymakers and say, there's no reason to wait 20 years for this project when there's so much money in the plan. We just need to reorder the priorities.
Thanks, Dave. I see that someone also asked, how do they get a project on the list if it wasn't a project that existed when our list was first created over the past 12 months or so, and asking again if the list will evolve. I think Dave went over some of that earlier in the presentation in case you missed it. Everyone will get a recording of the presentation, and I think probably a PDF, right, Ashley, that'll have all of that information and walk you through how you can add a new project to the list. You can find that information on the FAQ page of our project website. So if you want to add a project that's not there, or you want to correct the details of a project, you can do that there. And absolutely, this list is going to grow and evolve. And we want to see these projects move from, proposed to funded to complete. And we want to see more projects. Right now, there's, I think, 1,200 or 1,400 projects on there. We want to see double that, triple that. So please send us your projects. We'd love to add them.
I see a question here. How will folks know when a project has been built or funded? How will you celebrate success? That's a fun question. What's the best way for folks to get involved? I think we said it a couple of times, but just underscore it.
Sure. Sign up on our action alert list if you're on this call right now. Ashley can put a link in there if you haven't already done that. And that way you'll get a notice when your local advocacy organization is ready to take action in support of a particular project. That's one way. Martina, do you want to add? Anything?
I think, yeah, through our transformative stories that Dave talked about a little bit earlier, we want to highlight these projects. We want to celebrate the wins with local advocacy coalitions and local governments. We want to celebrate elected officials when they build projects. It's always good to give them a pat on the back when they get a great project built. So through our transformative stories on our website, through our social media channels, we want to celebrate those that way. Through action alerts saying, we don't want action alerts to go out just when it's an emergency. We want to say, hey, this project that you helped advocate for got built, as Dave said. And I think there are sort of unlimited numbers of ways that we could evolve that over time to make sure that we're celebrating those wins.
Somebody asked about their city's draft bike plan and said that they're accepting comments and asked if we can do peer review. Probably not in detail. It's a lot of cities in the United States. Happy to review it, but this spurs me to request or suggest another way we can help. In a lot of cases, you might know of a priority that you'd like to see in your plan that's not in there, or a design change that you'd like to see. And you can help us help you by drafting a letter that to your planners or your officials saying, hey, we think that this should be a protected bike lane and not a regular bike lane. And we're the national experts on infrastructure. We support your local group in building this to make sure that we back up the work that you're kind of doing. So help us help you by drafting the action alert or the letter, and we will put our signature on it and send it for you.
Mm-hmm. I saw another question. I don't know why I can't find it now. Oh, question about recreation and this campaign. This individual is asking how that they're looking to support a recreation mountain bike project in their community in Tennessee. How will this program and overall effort help with projects that are in the recreation space?
Well, sure. Yeah, I can jump in. Feel free to add though. We want to support both recreation and transportation projects. So our list of projects includes not only things like protected bike lanes and paths, shared use paths, but also mountain bike trails, pump tracks, bike parks. So those are all considered part of this project, the Great Bike Infrastructure Project. And we can help advance those too through all of the different mechanisms that Dave described earlier, through our action alerts and different things like that. I saw another question. Someone asked how they can integrate public art into bike infrastructure and traffic calming, which is always a really great thing to do. It builds a lot of community support and gets people involved in these kinds of projects. There are a few resources that we could point you to. Bloomberg Philanthropies has an initiative called Asphalt Art. And they have some great resources on their website about ways to integrate art into traffic calming projects and bike infrastructure projects. Last year, we actually, I believe, published an article about that program on our website. And that includes some data about it. It's often helpful to ease the concerns of traffic engineers about putting public art in the middle of an intersection or in the middle of a bike lane. So we included some data about the safety impacts of that, and it's of course positive. So encourage you to check that out. And, I think if you want to get in touch with either of us afterwards, we could point you to some additional resources on that.
Y'all, I'm answering lots of questions in the chat, so make sure that you check that out. I want to address Tom Armstrong's question about their small, medium-sized city with a lot of narrow streets, and the understanding that the NACTO bike guide offers solutions which generally require a wider street. And I think that the NACTO guide does make recommendations for narrow streets. In your case, it sounds like you have two solutions, two potentials. One is to remove the parking on one side of the street, which is politically challenging, but good for the business, contrary to what maybe most people think of, what most business people will think of at first. It is going to be good for their business to create a more alive street. So if you can get a few business folks to agree to get rid of parking and on that street, that's one solution. And the other solution is just slow speeds. A street that doesn't have any bike facilities qualifies as a low stress street in our analysis if and only if the speeds are very slow. Very rarely is the low speed limit enough. You usually need things like a speed hump or diverters or other pieces of infrastructure that are affordable to build in order to make sure that speeds are slow. But that's a solution that works if you can manage it in your community.
That's great, Dave. And I wanted to highlight really quickly too, just once more for our 1000 project list, if folks have edits to the projects that are listed, the advocacy group that's there, or you want to add a whole new project or request one for the list, I've dropped the links in the chat to those forms.
Thanks for that reminder, Ashley.
Martina, can you address Joel's question about the time frame for the federal funding, the bicycle infrastructure or the bipartisan infrastructure law? Is that a 5-year or a 6-year program?
Sure, that's where we're estimating that funding that we talked about earlier, that $13 billion is going to be available between now and 2028. There's absolutely competition for those funds. So some of that is prescriptive funds like the Highway Safety Improvement Program that is handed down from the federal government to states. And that funding can be used for bike and pedestrian projects that are safety projects, but it could also be used for other things like just general traffic calming projects or road guide projects that don't include bike or pedestrian infrastructure. So there's competition, at the state level within states when they're making those decisions about what projects get funded. But there's also competition in what we call the discretionary, or the competitive funding programs, like the Build program and some of these others like Reconnecting Communities. These are all available on USDOT's website, all of the different grant programs that are there. And within those grant programs, all kinds of projects are eligible. So they could be transit projects. In some cases, they could be highway widening projects that are competing with bike and pedestrian projects. So it's absolutely very competitive, but I think now more than ever, there's a very clear desire from USDOT to fund more bike and pedestrian projects and to consider things like health, public health, environmental impact, and the ability to address issues of equity in communities, which bike projects are pretty great at doing. And so I think they're going to be scoring a lot higher than they may be used to in some of these competitive programs.
I see a really great question, and I know we're almost at time, but I wanted to highlight this one because Martina wrote a wonderful blog, but this attendee asks, are there any resources available on how to overcome pushback from businesses, neighborhoods, any stakeholders that are opposed to new bike lanes? And I'm sure there's lots of advocates on the call today that are in the weeds of many of these projects, but Martina, do you want to highlight your recent blog on the advocacy playbook? Oh, you're muted.
Ashley, and I don't know if you're able to add that one into the chat, or maybe we can send out to folks afterwards, but we recently, my colleague Kieran and I wrote a blog on People for Bike's website that we're calling the Bike Advocacy Playbook, and it has a lot of great talking points for you to use when you're out there talking to your elected officials, your neighbors, or you're at community meetings. I think a lot of us have been in the situation where we've been at a community meeting and people are just saying things that aren't true about bike infrastructure or bikes in general. And so we tried to dispel a lot of those myths and kind of give you the very easy talking points. You can print it out and bring it with you and read off of it, of what to say when someone is saying something that's not quite true about a bike project or about what bikes do in general. Bike lanes cause traffic jams. You hear all kinds of things like this, or bike lanes aren't actually safe. We have all of the talking points that you need in there. And I think it's a great starting point for folks to use when they're talking to people.
Awesome. Well, we have 1 minute left. Is there any closing thoughts, Martina and Dave, you'd like to give to the attendees today?
I want to encourage folks to send questions that we didn't have time to address to infrastructure@peopleforbikes.org. For example, tools to quantify increase in biking after new infrastructure. Complicated question with no good answer, but I can help you out. So we'll do our best to help with that. Yeah, I could keep going, but we're running out of time, so I'll go quick.
Yeah, and I'll just say in closing, thank you all so much for taking the time to join us. You know, I think we often get asked what's the top barrier, like why can't all this stuff move forward? And it's honestly, it's political will. This isn't an engineering problem. It's not that we don't know how to create great bike facilities, whether it's on a rural road or a narrow old city street or a new wide street. We know how to fund and build great bike infrastructure, but elected officials and decision makers, they need to feel supported when they advance bike infrastructure, and they need to hear that people want more. So please reach out to your elected officials. Let them know that you want bike infrastructure and bike policy in your community. That's probably the best thing you can do to help advance this work.
Absolutely. And Martina, I have to add to that, because you mentioned this in your advocacy playbook, I'm sure, is that you might not be the best person. Yes, please reach out to your local elected officials. You must. But get other folks also to do it. You might not be the best person to make that point. You really, they need to hear from a diverse range of people who care about this stuff in order to change their political calculation.
Awesome. I've put so much in the chat today. Don't worry, I'll follow up with an email with all the links, the recording, the slides, everything you need. If you have additional questions, please, of course, email Martina or Dave or myself, and we'd be happy to keep chatting. But thank you all for taking the time today and for such a engaging conversation, such wonderful questions. Thank you again. Hope everybody has a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye.